no regrets, no confusion. There'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change my ways.
Welcome back to the Leaving Eden podcast. We are your hosts. My name's Gavi.
And I am cult survivor, cult expert, Sadie Carpenter.
How you doing today? How is life? How's everything?
I'm doing pretty good.
I'm doing pretty good as well. I'm feeling quite happy about the quality of questions that we have from our listeners today that we're going to answer. This is the second of our 2 consecutive Q&A episodes from our listeners. We solicited questions from you guys, either by email or on a post that we made in our Facebook group. And the quality of questions that we got was really fantastic, and we just couldn't limit ourselves to only answering a few of them or only doing one Q&A episode just because we got so many and they were all really good.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed doing Q&A. The questions that people come up with are always great. This was just a really good crop of a bunch of good ones all at once. If
you missed last week's episode, you can listen to it on our podcast feed. You don't need to listen to that one to listen to this one, though. So it's not like this one's based. It's not like it's a part 2 of like a 2-parter like we did with J. Frank Norris or something like that. So you can just listen to this one if you want, and then go back and listen.
Can you? I'm sorry. That hit me funny because can you imagine if someone listened to the second part of the J. Frank Norris 2-part episode without listening to the first part?
They would just be wondering who is this guy?
Who the hell was this? What he burned down? What other thing? Who?
He killed who? What did he do? The jar? Yeah.
Yeah.
If you didn't check out that episode is probably one of the craziest things that we've ever talked about, where it was this guy, he burned down his house, got kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention, killed a guy, and then told everybody that he scooped up a bunch of brains in a jar and that's why they shouldn't sin. That's not what we're talking about today. Today we're answering your questions. Before we get into that, the Leaving Eden podcast is the podcast about my BFF and co-host Sadie Carpenter's life in and escape from the independent fundamental Baptist cult, the cult in which she was raised. We talk about this cult, we talk about other cults, we talk about religion, we talk about fundamentalism, we talk about the real and present threat that cults and cult ideologies pose to society as a whole, and it is our goal to promote freedom of mind, freedom of thought, and freedom of religion. So if you like our show, if you are a fan of our show, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast. And on our Patreon, we have extended, uncensored, and ad-free versions of most of our podcast episodes. These episodes also come out a few days early, so you can listen to them over the weekend rather than having to wait for Monday to listen to them. We have an extended version of our episode about Jill Duggar's new book, Counting the Cost. No doubt there will be a little bit of extra stuff on today's episode that goes on the Patreon as well that isn't on the regular streaming cut. So you want to subscribe to the Patreon to get access to that. You can also join our Facebook group and our subreddit. Those are both called Eden Exodus. So if you go to Facebook, search Eden Exodus, you'll find it. If you go to Reddit and you search Eden Exodus, you'll find it there as well. And I guess I don't have anything else to say except that we need to thank our patrons. 3 I Gave It All tier patrons. Your names are, as always, Kathleen Moncrief, Melissa Mosley, and Todd Dale, on behalf of his lovely and wonderful and amazing deconstructorina of a wife, Madeline Antrim. We thank you guys so much.
Yeah, big thank you to our I Gave It All tier patrons.
We also have many Faith Promise Missions tier patrons who we are also deeply thankful for. Your names are Alex P., Ali Allen, Anisha Patel, Autumn of Our Discontent, I love that one, Brittany, Brooke Tully, Chrissa, Crystal Patterson, Dear Ethan Hansen the Musical, Dora J., Eleanor Donahue, Enchanted Fairy, Hannah Ross, Hope Norum, Horton Here's a Shane, Janine Collin, Jen Kaharski, Jessica Tambo, Jonna K. Turwee, Kristen Marie, Learned Vixen, Linda Morgan, Lindsay Goss, Lorena Watson, Madeline Antrim, Maggie Fink, Marlena Stuve, Marcia Millard, Mary Williams, Mary Martin, Megan Arendt, Rob the Methodist, Sadie's actual BFF trademark, Stephanie Johnson, Steve and Amy, Susie, Tara McNamara, 1010, and Wes the Cowboy. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, a big thank you, of course, to the I Gave It All tier and Faith Promise Missions tier patrons. A big welcome to those of you who are joining us over on Patreon recently. And thank you to everyone who supports us on Patreon, no matter the amount, and to all of our listeners who support us in other ways. Downloading our show every week, making sure the subscribe button is clicked, leaving us a positive review, recommending us on social media, shouting us out to friends and family, all of that makes a difference. All of that is part of why we're able to have the show that we have, and we're thankful. No matter what your contribution is, we're thankful for it.
Thank you guys so much. You guys are all the best. Sadie, do you want to hit us with the TW?
Sure thing. In general, we talk about a lot of potentially triggering topics on this show, including but not limited to suicide and mental health, racism, misogyny, PTSD and PTSD symptoms, child abuse, mental, physical, and sexual abuse, and spiritual abuse, including guilt, shame, and fear. In most episodes, we will mention at least a few of these topics, but we try to avoid any graphic detail unless it's necessary to the story that we're telling. And if we're going to go into that kind of detail, we let our audience know before we start so that people can skip if they need to skip.
Okay. So our first question of the day, and this is a fun one. We're just coming out with the searing heat right out of the gate. And this is a sillier, and so this one says, this is a sillier one, but who from Fundie World, Sadie, who from Fundie World would you most want to see in a Bachelor or Bachelorette show, either as a lead or as a contestant?
Oh boy. I would love to see Jana Duggar on Bachelor, but also I know like on Bachelor specifically, she would go home night one. So it wouldn't really be that entertaining.
Wait, so you would see her as like a contestant on The Bachelor, not like as the Bachelorette?
Well, you have to be a contestant on The Bachelor to get on The Bachelorette, and then you have to be a contestant on Bachelorette to get on Bachelor, and then you also have to be a contestant on one of the two to get on Bachelor in Paradise.
Oh, okay.
It's like a feeder mechanism.
Okay, that makes sense. So they have like their own Bachelor. I see. I've never watched it. You're thinking about this like in universe. You're not thinking about this as like, wouldn't it be funny if they had Jana Duggar be the Bachelorette, and then there had to just be a bunch of Fundie men lining up to try to marry into that crazy family?
Oh, Fundie Bachelor. You didn't say Fundie Bachelor.
No, but I assume that if Jana
Isn't
Duggar
that just called Going to Hiles Anderson?
I guess.
I think I've been on that show.
I guess it's not fun. It's Fundie Bachelor in Paradise, but instead of paradise, it's hell. And instead of paradise, it's Northwest Indiana.
Fundie Bachelor in Northwest Indiana Paradise. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I think Indiana is a beautiful place. I've driven through Indiana on multiple occasions, and I think that it's like that part of the country of Indiana, of Ohio, the idyllic, like the farmland and the forests and the red barns, that it's quite nice to go through.
Oh yeah, I love the Midwest. I would love to do like one day when I've had all the kids I'm going to have and they're all old enough to appreciate a road trip. One of the big things I'd love to do is drive Route 66. So you start in Chicago, you go through Chicago, south through Illinois, and then across through like Joplin, Missouri, and parts of Oklahoma to head out towards California.
That's fun.
Oh yeah. Like I've driven significant portions of Route 66 on road trips, but I've never done the whole thing start to finish, and that would be one of my dream family vacations. Having
done multiple cross-country road trips, I will say that I personally prefer, if I don't have to be somewhere within a certain amount of time, I would much prefer to drive cross-country than fly cross-country. That's my personal opinion. But back to the question. Back to the question. The reason,
on like the actual Bachelor as we know it, not alternate universe Bachelor. I would love to see Jana. She would probably get eliminated night one. However, if her limo exit, if she could do something with 19 kids with her limo exit, like, work with me here. Let's say she obviously couldn't get all 18 of her siblings to appear on the show, but I've seen wilder limo exits, honestly. There was that guy, what's his face, Jacob with the white horse. There have been buses and food trucks and that really cute guy that Rachel turned down on the first date, and I don't know why the hell she did that. The guy with the race car. There was a guy who drove up in an actual race car because he was a race car driver. Anyway, I don't remember his name. Anyway, Jana could get the whole limo full of like some of her siblings and then like actors to stand in for the siblings that wouldn't or couldn't be on the show.
Like Jill.
Right, like Jill. And Jana could get out of the limo and have 18 other people like in a little duck line behind her and introduce herself to the Bachelor and say something like, I grew up in a really big family and I'd love to make beautiful babies with you. And that would be, you don't know how limo exits are. You don't know about Kitty Cat Connor. You don't understand this, Gavi.
This is atrocious.
Brendan, among other people, our friend of the pod, Brendan Hare, among other people, are dying laughing. I promise I'm being hilarious in Bachelor world.
I'm so confused. I've never once watched The Bachelor.
Will you just trust me that like all of our listeners who do watch The Bachelor are dying laughing over this? So Jana could get out of the limo and her limo exit could be having 19 kids behind her and like some joke about, I want to have a big family. Let's get started. And then she might make it past night one. That's her only chance.
See, what I'm thinking is rather than a limo, if you're going to get 19 people, like it has to be coming out of a Volkswagen Beetle is my thought on this.
Was it Rodney who wore the Apple costume? Somebody remind me for Michelle's season.
What I think though, is that if you're going to have, out of all of like the Fundie personalities that I know of, I think there's only one answer for somebody who you would want to see on like one of these dating shows. I think that this is far and away the number one pick. He's like the Victor Wembanyama of Fundies who you would want to see on a dating show. And that is Micah from Plathville.
Okay. Yes, that's an actual real answer.
Yes.
No, I would absolutely tune in if he were on Bachelorette. Actually, he should really do that.
Because I could legitimately see him, because he's already been on reality TV on like TLC. I could see him going on like reality dating show fame, and like if he could become like a Bachelor Nation fan favorite. Like having watched a decent amount of Welcome to Plathville, I like Micah. Micah's fun. Micah's funny, and he seems like he's young and he's a little naive sometimes, but he seems like he is a decent person and has a good head on his shoulders.
So if I could go back in time like 15 years and pull a Fundie like 15 years ago, I think young Carissa Collins would be incredible on The Bachelor. Like her before she met her husband. I think she would have been a very, very deep cut. But Olivia, the news reporter from I think Ben Higgins' season, she was or Corinne from whoever season that was, Nick's, I think. Just those like iconic drama girls in Bachelor. Also, long shot, but what if Lori Alexander would come on The Bachelor and be like a side character? Like she sits around during people's dates and judges them and tells them how immoral they are.
Like the Lori Alexander simulcast.
Yes.
Like, you know how like when you can watch football and you can watch like just the regular broadcast of football, or you can watch the Manning cast where they have Peyton and Eli Manning who are commentating the game instead of whoever.
Oh, my cousins.
We have the transformed cast with
Yes.
where Lori Alexander goes on TV and she's just like these like and just like hates on everything that they're doing. I would pay money to watch that. That would be incredible. If Lori Alexander started doing like YouTube reaction content, I would watch the shit out of that. I truly would.
Oh yeah, the like joy and rage that I would get out of it would be worth the moral problems of potentially giving her ad money.
Like she would probably be demonetized from YouTube pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Is my impression, because I think that she would just get mass reported and they would take her monetization away. But I think that she would make that content even if she wasn't getting paid for it.
That would be even better because it takes out my like ethical problems with watching it.
Yeah.
I should clarify for people who are maybe not long-term listeners of the show. As far as I know, I am related to Peyton and Eli Manning. We are fifth cousins once removed, I think. It's on the Manning side. My Carpenter great-grandmother, who married into the Carpenter family, it's her mother's brother is the ancestor of Archie Manning. But we are technically like distant cousins.
So next question, we're going to move on to the next question. Thank you guys for listening to us talk about some absolute nonsense. How do we handle, and this one I feel like is very relevant to the Jill Duggar discussion that we had a couple weeks ago where we reviewed her book. But this person wants to know, how do you handle being around close family members whose relationship you value? For example, my grandfather, but they're still indoctrinated and very vocal about their beliefs. Basically, I don't plan to ever tell them what I believe or don't believe, and I know they will never change their beliefs, which is fine. However, their comments trigger me a lot, and sometimes it's difficult. Ooh, that is a tough question, and that is one that I feel like a lot of our listeners might want some insight about, and that's probably something a lot of them have dealt with as well.
Yeah, and so glad that this person wrote in because, like you said, this is incredibly relevant. It is okay if a relationship with somebody is harming you. It is okay to not remain in relationship with them, no matter how closely they're related to you, no matter if they're a very long-term friend. If it is harming you and you don't want to continue the relationship, you are absolutely allowed to not continue that relationship. However, there are a lot of people on the other side of that coin who, for whatever valid reason, want to continue a relationship with somebody who can sometimes be triggering, sometimes be toxic, or even sometimes be harmful. And I always want to validate somebody's individual choice and somebody's freedom to make that choice. I don't have an answer that's just a pat answer on how to handle this, but I have questions that can maybe help people find an answer. If you've evaluated this relationship and you know that you want to keep the relationship as best as you can with appropriate boundaries in place, what things can you enjoy in this situation with your grandpa that leads the conversation away from triggering things? Is there a hobby that you enjoy together? Is there something that you really like talking about with him that is always going to catch his attention and pull focus from the things that maybe he wants to get into that would trigger you? Also, a boundaries question. When he's not having such a good day and he's getting into a lot of triggering topics, is it like every other sentence that's something that is activating you, triggering you? Or is it something that only rarely comes up? How easy is it if he gets on a trail of something that's triggering to pull him to a different subject? Are there ways to mitigate the triggers for yourself? Are there, like, if he is gonna say triggering things sometimes, is there anything you can do for yourself to put some armor up that helps you deflect and not take it to heart or not get as badly triggered by it? And what kind of self-care can you do when you do get triggered? And how well does that self-care work? I have things that, and this has come up a ton as I've been texting like all of my ex-IFB, ex-IBLP creator friends, after Jill's book came out, I was texting everybody like, hey, I'm okay. It's, I had some things that got me, but I'm doing all right. How are you? What self-care have you been doing? Do you need anything? Do you need to talk? We were all trying to watch out for each other. And one thing that really became clear to me doing that, there are things that trigger me that leave me with a low level ick for a long time, like days or even weeks. And there are things that trigger me and it's bad for a couple of hours. And then it's like it flushes out of my system. I can pick myself up, move on, and pretty much be okay. And Jill's book was the second kind. It hit me really hard and I was not okay for like half a day after I finished the book. And then 24 hours later, just about like 24 hours or 36 hours after I finished the book, we were in the studio recording and then the episode was published. And by that point, I really felt okay and felt like I was not, triggering myself further by talking about it. I felt balanced and like I'd processed the things that triggered me when I read the book. So back to this person who is wanting to have a relationship with their grandpa, like what kind of triggered are you getting? And when you do get triggered, what does it take for you to get back to okay? Because all of these questions, the answers to these questions are going to inform what kind of relationship you can have with your grandpa. This situation, without any more information from the question asker, I could see it being, well, I'm triggered, but I can journal about it, I can write down all the things I would have said if I felt like I could say them, and then I feel mostly better. But I could also see it being, I'm triggered, I'm stuck in a trigger loop, I cannot get out of this loop, this is bad. And I can see there are some grandpas who can be deflected right back into more neutral topics. And I also know that there are some grandpas who will just not stop talking about whatever that thing is that triggers you. So my advice would be that your boundaries are yours. I hope that these questions have maybe unlocked something or opened your mind to an alternate solution or a specific boundary that would be helpful. Boundaries don't always have to be stated, and they don't have to be a big, scary sit-down conversation. That's having a firm, verbal, stated boundary in a sit-down conversation is absolutely necessary for many situations, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes a boundary is just every time this particular person brings up a conspiracy theory about LGBTQ people, you change the subject and start talking about their favorite baseball team. That's a boundary, just as much as having a sit-down conversation where you say to that person, hey, if you repeat such and such conspiracy theory about LGBTQ people, I'm going to leave your house. Those are both boundaries. Those are both appropriate in certain situations. And sometimes that first type where it's, if you do this, I will leave. Please don't do this. I want to have a relationship with you. Sometimes that is absolutely necessary, but that's not necessary for every single situation. I hope that the questions I asked can help you think about this. And I encourage you to be really creative when you're thinking about those boundaries, when you're thinking about self-care, when you're thinking about protecting yourself from triggers, because this situation is yours. It is unique to you. And I want you to feel empowered to make the creative and unique choices that will support you the best in this relationship. And I wish you all the best.
One of the things that I've noticed with a lot of these kinds of indoctrination is that they will almost encourage people who are adherents to their ideology or their conspiracies or whatever to bring it up with people and to make it contentious and to alienate people and to cause that uncomfortableness so that people will either have to just like go along with it or they'll have to like remove themselves. And that's sort of almost part of fighting the fight that they think that they have to do. And that can be really difficult to deal with when somebody's intentionally being as provocative as possible.
Yeah, and that's really where that more verbalized boundary, I think, is more helpful. It's, hey, if you start talking about this particular conspiracy theory, I'm just going to end our visit and come back another day.
if you're going over to somebody's house so that you can watch like a football game or something, then that's going to be better than just being like, I'm just going to go over to your house and hang out with you for 3 hours just because I want to hang out with you for 3 hours. Because if there's the football game going, then you can always deflect back to whatever's going on in the game if it gets uncomfortable.
Yes. And that's why I was asking about, is there a hobby? Is there a mutual interest that really brings you together on more neutral ground? But also, that is protecting yourself, having that out. I would really encourage anybody who's in the situation to reframe or frame having that out, like the football game that's playing. That's your protection. That is something that you are doing for yourself, to give yourself options in this situation. That's smart.
Do you want to move on to the next question? Because the next question is also a great one.
Okay.
So this next question is, has your mind ever been changed about any topic or issue as a result of something that you researched for the podcast? That's a heater right there. That's a great question. And I want to know your answer to it.
Okay. I don't know if I would say my mind was changed, but doing the abortion episode really helped clarify and solidify my own opinions, because I thought I was done thinking through exactly what I believe, but when I had to say it very publicly, recorded on the internet forever, I had to go back and double check and evaluate, if I'm going to say this, is it accurate? I should look up statistics to make sure what I say is supported. And is this what I really believe in? Am I okay with saying this in front of thousands of people where they will be able to access it forever? So it set my opinions a little more firmly and illuminated places that my opinions were not quite done. And I am happy I was able to be honest about that in the episode. You know, I don't know what happens in this scenario. I don't know for sure what I believe. This is what I am pretty sure about. Also, of course, this show has massively changed my opinion about Jack Hyles.
Yeah.
It's just been blow after blow, but that's okay. Sometimes we deconstruct in real time.
Well, going back to the abortion episode, I remember when we recorded that episode, we were both kind of scared that it would cause like an absolute firestorm of negative comments in the Facebook group of people who either thought that we were afraid for various, because it is a contentious issue and people believe a lot of different things about it. And then when we came out with the episode, people were like, you know, you guys made a lot of really good points. It was very well thought out.
Yeah, I truly thought that anybody who was like not I really, really thought all of the pro-life people were going to hate me and all of the pro-choice people were going to hate me all at once.
We thought that, like, legit, we thought that episode was going to cost us like half our audience.
Oh yeah, we really did. We were like watching our numbers thinking, okay, how bad is this going to be? And are they ever going to come back?
And we went into the Facebook group, and all of the comments on that one was like, you made a really good point about this. I never thought about it. It was very interesting.
And constructive. Like, you know, I disagree on this, but this is why I disagree. And I appreciate hearing your opinion. And, you know, I think the things we can agree on are these things.
And I think the thing that that I am happy about when we set out to do that episode is that we really tried to avoid the sort of sloganeering that is often present within that issue. For me, the issue that my opinion changed about most, a lot of it was about these famous fundies and these reality TV stars like the Duggars. Because if you go back to the beginning of the show and you go back and listen to like episode 1 or whatever, and the first like 20, 30 episodes, even the first year, I really didn't know much of anything about a lot of these topics. And there are some pretty obvious places where my knowledge is very lacking. I personally think, though, that the biggest thing that I changed my mind about was the Duggars, because when the show started, I thought, like, I didn't grow up in a house where we didn't even have cable when I was growing up because my parents didn't think it was worthwhile. And so that sort of like reality television family, that was more treated as like a novelty and like a sideshow, like a circus carnival attraction like phenomenon rather than something worthwhile and worth paying attention to. And the more that I learned about who these people are, how involved they are in politics, and particularly how involved they can be in education policy, and their affiliates can be involved in education policy, as well as the actual influence of the IBLP. And once I started thinking of it as like a branch, as like the PR branch of the IBLP, then it started making more sense to me why this is an important issue to be talked about, not just with regards to, oh, they're on TV and they don't wear pants, let's make fun of them. Having talked to numerous IBLP survivors out there was one of the things that I think really changed my perspective on them and their significance.
I think to piggyback off of something that you said, I think we've both really honed in on what is okay to make fun of also. Mm-hmm. And we really dealt with that a lot when we started researching and writing for the Rodriguez family episode.
Yeah.
Because we had already been learning and thinking about these things, and we wrote this episode about the family with all of the minor children, and that really kind of coalesced what we now have as a policy between the two of us on how and when we make fun of people and what we choose to make fun of and what we choose to let go.
And a lot of the stuff, like when I would go back and listen to a lot of the early episodes of the show, because like a year ago or so, I went back and did some like remastering of probably the first like 15, 20 episodes, something like that. I would listen back to the episodes and I would listen to them and think that joke that I made was really kind of mean-spirited. And I don't like that about the thing that I was saying. And I would listen back to that and I would hear that and I would hear that and I would hear that again. And I'm glad that we really have tried to make a consistent effort to not make jokes in mean spirit about people if we can avoid it. Or if we're saying something snarky or mean about somebody, it's going to be somebody like Jim Bob, or it's going to be based on something that Jim Bob did, not just based out of like blind prejudice that I often see on a lot of the snark boards and the snark subreddits and stuff, where they will just say, I kind of feel like a lot of the snark subreddit stuff and the snark boards feels like it's in line with Rich, what's his name? Rich Juzowicz, or what's his name? Yeah, Rich Juzwiak, the guy for Jezebel, that wrote that really mean-spirited takedown almost of Counting the Cost. And Sadie, you had your response to that, which I thought was very good. Liz Hunter's response to it was also very good. But the biggest thing to me felt like he was just saying something about Jill Duggar because he felt like it was acceptable for him to treat her with cruelty, like it was socially acceptable for him to be cruel to her in an article and to make fun of her and to be mean to her. And she's a Christian she's a conservative and she's a Christian, so therefore she's fair game. And that's how it felt to me. And I didn't really like that. And so now when I listen back to a lot of old things and I hear that in myself, I'm like, I don't like that about myself.
And I think that's maybe an example of both of us changing our minds, because that's something we had conversations about off mic as well, and kind of formed almost company policy between the two of us.
Things that have changed, I don't think that the biggest thing that changed has been like a particular opinion or a view on something about me. The thing that I think has changed is that legitimately listening to yourself talk, because I do all the edits for our show. All of our like production and stuff is done in-house, and I do all the editing for the show. If I like listening to hundreds of hours of yourself interacting socially with your friend will legitimately change your personality if you do it for long enough. You think I'm joking, but I'm not.
Yeah, and I hope it's been a change for the better.
I think it's been a change for the better, because there's a lot of times when I observe somebody else doing something in a social situation and I say, I don't like it when that person does that thing. And then I listen back to myself talking to you or talking to a guest, and I have to hear oh, I'm doing that thing that I don't like it when I hear somebody else do that in a different interview show. I need to change, like, and mental note to myself, I need to not do that.
Yeah. Having I do listen to episodes of our show frequently. I don't listen to every episode because the time that I have to listen to podcasts is limited, and I want to listen to True Crime and Cocktails, and they put out longer episodes than we do.
How?
So
how did they find the time to make that?
that takes up a lot of my listening time. But I do listen to episodes of ours frequently, and yes, it is kind of terrifying having to listen to yourself on mic interacting with other people. But I don't want it to make me a better performer on mic. I want it to make me a better person. If I hear myself doing something I don't like, I don't want to just change it for the performance. I want to change it in real life.
That's also sort of the way I see it, because you and I, neither of us are like famous people with reputations to protect. So we can be ourselves on mic on the show and not have to worry about, oh, if I say this thing, is it going to affect my acting career or my music career if somebody clips this and they don't like it? Like, this is like our main thing that we do. This isn't like a side gig, so we can have the focus be on that, and we can actually try to be ourselves on it. And so that's sort of the way that I see it as well.
And that this can go on Patreon, but that kind of goes into authenticity as well, because I think one of the biggest ways that I've grown doing this podcast is learning about authenticity and what really makes me myself. Because I always, even, when we had 3 episodes and 100 listeners, I want to bring my real self to this podcast. And I also want to keep a good amount of my real self for the people who know me in real life and not on this podcast. Dealing with that and wrestling with that has really, I think, taught me about who I am and what I bring to the world. I want our listeners to get my real personality and my real self. I want to give our listeners truly an authentic, real part of myself and keep something private for myself and my family.
And there's plenty of stuff that goes on in your life that you absolutely don't talk about on here.
Yeah, but most of it I text you in all caps about.
Well, I do think that's important, though, because like once you get to the point of using your personal life to make content out of, not in the way I think that you do, where you're like, I'm a cult survivor, these are my experiences, but also we do like research about aspects of fundamentalism and like put it into, and you can speak from experience having gone through it and how these things function. If it's like, if it ever got into I think when content creators get into the family vlog or genre of their content creation lives, I think that also tends to generally have a detrimental effect on their families and their families' lives, because then you constantly have that thing in your head 24 hours a day. Can I make content out of this? Can I make content out of this? Can I make content out of this?
Well, and then you do things like crack an egg on your toddler's head.
Yeah, or just I don't know. It's like, why, I mean, that's kind of also the reason why I bleep my girlfriend's name on this show, because it, like, she's not even on social media, and I want to put out as little information about her that makes her identifiable as possible. And I think that's just like, really trying to set healthy boundaries.
But I met her and I thought she was great.
Her mom listens to the show. Did you know that?
Hello, Bleep's mom.
Yeah.
I think your daughter is very cool. She's got a good sense of humor. She's very smart, and her smile lights up a room. And I think she and Gavi are just very well matched.
Oh, thank you.
That was what Jonathan and I were both saying. Is that's a good match.
I agree.
Yeah.
I am in agreement. We're recording this a couple days before her birthday, so I'm very excited for that. That's in a couple days. I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to go to break. Is that cool?
Sounds perfect to me.
All right. So this is one for you, Sadie. My question stems from one-off comments Sadie has occasionally made about watching The Santa Claus as a kid with her family and sneaking Ella Enchanted growing up. How do Fundies decide what media they allow themselves and their kids to watch? If one family has stricter standards than another, do the kids from the less strict family tend to feel the need to hide their worldly knowledge? Very curious about how the rules lawyer being allowed to watch some shows and not others.
It's a good question. So there's a general guideline, and then there's people who fall stricter than that guideline and people who fall a little less strict than that guideline. The general guideline is that you can't watch a show where somebody breaks the Fundie rules without being punished. So a show where they portray a character drinking alcohol but then later getting into a wreck, that's okay. Or if they even portray somebody drinking and then doing something they regret, that might be okay.
So it's like the morality code in old Hollywood.
Yeah, they pretty much follow the Hays Code. So a show where somebody drinks and then doesn't have any consequences is not okay. The IFB is, now that you mention it, it's pretty similar to the Hays Code, but they're okay with guns and weirdly smoking.
Huh.
It's because you can only watch really old movies and there's smoking in all really old movies. So, for example, we had Dumbo on one point on VHS, but we ended up having to throw Dumbo away because there's some birds in it who smoke tobacco and maybe drink.
And they don't get punished.
Right. I was a really little kid. I don't remember anything about this except for there are bad birds in Dumbo.
Oh, wait, the crows in Dumbo are supposed to be a racist stereotype. That was
that makes sense. So,
God, I forgot about that.
I just remember, they're bad because they smoke and we can't have that movie in our house. And now I haven't seen Dumbo since I was like 4, so I don't recall anything much about the movie. IFB shows also, or IFB people also tend to avoid shows and movies with a lot of immodest clothing. I grew up a little bit to the lenient side of this guideline because you're not going to find a movie without women wearing pants unless you're watching like 50s and 60s Disney movies, which I did watch a lot of. I watched a lot of Leave It to Beaver, really old superhero serials, like the black and white superhero serials, which I've talked about before. But we also watched the 1960s Batman, and Catwoman was definitely not IFB modesty approved. Anything with women in swimwear, particularly, was very much not allowed in my family, in my church. We were not even allowed to watch The Little Mermaid because of immodesty. So even cartoon immodesty is not allowed. My brothers and I watched the Disney 60s Swiss Family Robinson growing up, and I was allowed to watch that with my brothers, but I was supposed to avert my eyes from all instances of men without shirts. There was also we had a tape of old Looney Tunes cartoons that had all been compiled into like a 6-hour compilation on a VHS tape. And my dad went through and manually edited the tape to take out, there was some like Poseidon or somebody portrayed as shirtless, and he went in and manually edited the tape to take out shirtless male cartoon characters.
What about when Bugs Bunny dresses up as a girl?
Weirdly, that was allowed.
Honestly, though, that 6-hour-long tape of Looney Tunes, that still hits today.
Yeah, and then we watched a lot of musicals, like I've mentioned, The Music Man being one of my favorites that we watched a ton. When the Winter Olympics were on, when the Olympics were on, I was allowed to watch women's figure skating and women's gymnastics, but my brothers were not because of the immodesty. But I was allowed to watch men's swimming and men's gymnastics. So that's how it shook out for my family. The IFB also want to avoid any swearing at all in movies, even euphemisms like crap, darn, heck, that kind of thing. So that even takes a lot of PG movies off the table. A lot of people had TV Guardian type technology so that even mild swears could be, or euphemisms could be bleeped out. Before TV Guardian tech came along, my dad would manually edit tapes to bleep swears, as well as censoring out immodesty or any other inappropriate content. What I think is the really interesting question that this person asked, though, do the kids from the less strict family tend to feel the need to hide their worldly knowledge? I would go beyond that to say they are actually told to hide their worldly knowledge. So, non-media example, but my family was allowed to go trick-or-treating. We, of course, couldn't have costumes that were immodest. And we also weren't allowed nothing, no black clothing, nothing scary, no demons, ghosts, mummies, zombies, no forbidden media like Power Rangers. But we were allowed to go with our limited costume choices to go out trick-or-treating. But a lot of the families in our church were against trick-or-treating and would not allow their kids to do it. Or they would take their kids out but not wear costumes and pass out Chick Tracts to the trick-or-treaters, unsuspecting children in their neighborhood. My parents felt like it was fine and moral for us to go out trick-or-treating as long as we followed all these costume rules, but we were not allowed to talk about it at church because of 1 Corinthians 8 through 13 about not offending the weaker brother. So there's actually a scripture verse that if you are more liberated on a particular topic than somebody else is, it's interpreted by the IFB. If you are more liberated on a particular topic than someone else is, don't talk to them about it and don't tell them that you are less strict than they are.
I thought we were going to go to break, but I just have a follow-up question because it's related to that one that's also been asked here. And it is, how have you gone about catching up on pop culture things that you missed while you were in the cult? How have you figured out what kind of music or books you like versus what you don't like?
So I made a list of all of the things I had heard about but not experienced. There was a list for music, there was a list for movies, there was a list for books, and I worked my way through the lists, just like a checklist. The book list I got through very much while I was still IFB, like in high school. And this is how I read Shakespeare. This is how I read Jane Austen. I'm trying to think what else was on that list. I don't know off the top of my head. But I was working my way through that while I was still IFB. And then when I got out, I had heard Madonna, Britney Spears, and Michael Jackson preached about so many times that I had to go listen to their music. My movie list, I hope that I find one day, because I would love to get Dinah on the show to review my film list, because she is a certified real film expert, and I know that she would really enjoy dragging me for this film list that I made.
How'd you make it?
It was just literally every movie that I had ever heard of and not seen.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So just
And
anything
so it would
you'd
be
seen previews for or advertised,
previews, ads, movie posters, heard it on the radio, heard it preached about in a sermon. It was referenced in a book that I read. I was also really into, as a teenager, looking at red carpet photos for the Emmys, because the Emmys or the Oscars or the Grammys or whatever, because I was interested in fashion and that was the only way I knew how to interact with that. And I wanted to fantasize about what I would wear to prom if I had a prom, even though I didn't have a prom. And I was thinking, I'm going to look at these pictures and then I will know what is fashionable in formal wear. And then maybe some of it will be modest or something that I can make modest. And then when I go to the Valentine banquet in 3 years, when I'm a student at Hyles Anderson College, I'll know what to wear.
that's kind of wholesome though.
Yeah. I mean, it's cringy, but it's awesome.
Biggest thing, I guess, is anything that you can remember your pastor saying is sinful, go look that up first.
Right. No, but so I would read the names of people who were in whatever movies were coming out in 2008 to 2010. And then it would say so-and-so who was in this other movie 25 years ago and is famous for that movie. And that kind of stuff would go on my list. But this list was chaotic. it was literally every movie I had ever heard of. So I know Knocked Up was on the list, which I actually didn't see until like last year. Casablanca was on the list. 50 First Dates was on the list. And I think 10 Things I Hate About You was on the list.
Those are all good movies.
So it wasn't, yeah, but it's just kind of chaotic. And then I also think once I was like getting out and actually watching my way through the list, I looked up things like 100 best movies of all time and put ones that I was interested in onto the list.
So I guess one follow-up from me, that it isn't a listener question, but this is a follow-up from me, and then we'll go to break. Was there ever a movie that was on your list that you thought you had to see, and then when you watched it, you just either you thought it was terrible or you just were kind of not wowed by it?
Not that I recall, but also all movies kind of seemed wonderful.
But that's fantastic, I think.
Like I watched 50 First Dates and I'd probably never seen a rom-com before.
I mean, that's a good one, though.
Like I remember there was one romantic comedy that I was allowed to watch in the cult, and that was the movie Kate and Leopold.
I haven't seen that one. Is it good?
It's cute. It's about a time traveler. I think it's Meg Ryan in the lead, but it's about a guy who time travels back from the 1800s and falls in love with like a modern, strong female lead businesswoman in New York in the, early 2000s.
That's kind of fun.
I thought at the time I thought it was cute. Now I may learn that it was highly problematic because generally whenever I say something nice about someone or something on the podcast, that's when I find out something terrible. I've had a string of bad luck lately, y'all. I said nice things about Alice Cooper, and then like 2 weeks later, he came out as a raging transphobe.
R.I.P. I went and said my favorite guitar player is Carlos Santana, and then 2 weeks later, he came out as a raging transphobe.
Yeah, this has been happening to me for a couple.
Come on, man. Guys, just stop it.
Astute listeners may notice that I have had a string of very bad luck lately in such matters. But 50 First Dates was like the first modern rom-com kind of movie that I watched. So to me, it seemed amazing. And I don't know what I would think of it now. But at the time, it was like the best movie ever. I do remember I did not enjoy Madonna or Britney Spears at the time.
Interesting.
And now I would totally listen to either one of them for fun.
That's interesting, though, because when you go back and listen to something for the first time and you just don't have a sense of like the genre or the context for the music in the scene that it was in, sometimes it can sound either like jarring or it can sound just like
Trying to listen to music was so overwhelming because I had never really listened to music with a drum beat on purpose. I had only heard that as like music in the grocery store or shopping or at a ball game or something like that, and never sat down to listen to it in order to listen to it. So having drums was really overwhelming and weird. And just everything seemed too loud and like there was too much going on. It was overstimulating. There's too many lines to listen to.
That's
because a lot of the music I listen to is like piano and quartet. That's 5 lines. There's a piano, there's 4 singers. That's it. And a modern produced pop song could have dozens of lines of different instruments and synthesizers and backup singers and backup vocals and auto-tune and so on and so on.
And you're trying to listen through and get all of those.
Yeah, it just felt like too many things going in my ears at once.
That's really...
And of course, given my current music taste, clearly I got over it.
I'm glad you did, though. And I'm sure that there are some people who like they just can't get over it. I'm sure that exists.
I still like if I'm really stressed, like really, really bad, I can't listen to anything. I can't listen to metal. I can't listen to modern pop music. It has to be analog. It has to be minimal. Like I'll listen to like bluegrass or folk music or classical or like really old like 50s love songs, Big Beach Boys or Bing Crosby or something, because I cannot, if I'm in a bad mental space, I can't handle all the lines going into my head.
The one thing that I think probably has stayed the same for you, and this is just something that I've noticed when we've been talking about music together, is that you tend to focus a lot more on the lyrics than you do on what's going on musically as well.
Yeah, and that's Fundie indoctrination.
We're going to go to break and we're going to take up the offering. We will be right back, and we've got some more questions to answer for you guys. Thank you guys for sending them to us. We'll be right back.
Hey, Sadie here. If this is your first time listening to the Leaving Eden podcast, make sure you go back and check out episode 57. It's a primer episode for new listeners. That episode tells my personal story and gives you all the terms and information that you'll need to know going forward. Also, check out our cult true crime series, The First Family of Fundamentalism, so that you can get the whole cult story. If you like our show, you can support us by joining our Patreon, where we have extended and uncensored episodes as well as other bonus content available. You can also join in the discussion in our Facebook group. That group is called Eden Exodus. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell your worst enemy. The Leaving Eden podcast is a fully independent podcast, and we really appreciate your support. Now, back to the show.
If you like small town mystery, crazy news, and wild history, then the Florida Men on Florida Man podcast is for you. Each week, Josh Mills and Wayne McCarty bring you the absolute best Florida has to offer. So if you're looking for a show that's safe for the family, but funny enough to help you escape everyday life, then listen to the Florida Men on Florida Man podcast. That's Florida Men, plural, on Florida Man podcast.
We are back from our break. We have some more questions that we're going to answer before we let you guys go. I'm really excited for what we've got next week, because next week we're getting into Halloween content, right? Is that right?
I think we have 1 week after this episode before we get into Halloween, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
I don't know either. Time doesn't exist, and
that would require me knowing what day it is today, which I do not.
I don't know what day it is ever. That's just how our lives are.
I consistently, so much of my life is around the podcast schedule. I consistently think it is whatever week is coming up on the podcast. So if it's the middle of September, but we're recording an episode that goes out in October, I will think it's the middle of October. In my mind, time is tied to podcast release dates.
I as well have that issue. So the only time I ever know what day it is when it's Monday.
Right.
Because that's the day that we release episodes. And then if it's not Monday, then I don't know what day it is. So we've got some more questions to get into. Here's one. This is an interesting question. It says, apologies if this has already been asked, but could y'all dive more into the Mark of Cain? As a Black viewer, I feel like that's something that just never made sense to me. Interesting. Okay, so I asked Sadie about the Mark of Cain.
So I had definitely always heard that Cain was the first murderer, and that he was kind of forever cursed, like his name would be forever cursed because of that crime. But that's the extent of my knowledge.
So I looked this up, and it's from the book of Genesis. And in the story in the book of Genesis, Adam has 2 sons. One is Cain and one is Abel. They both provide offerings to God, but Abel's offering is more fondly taken by God than Cain's is. Cain becomes envious of his brother and kills him. And God says to Cain, "What have you done? You've spilled your brother's blood. Are you not your brother's keeper?" Then puts a mark on Cain, which is to distinguish him as part of his penitence for the crime, for the murder which he has committed. So I looked this up. Apparently, like we talked about when we talked about the curse of Ham, which was a different curse than the Mark of Cain. Similar to the curse of Ham, some American Protestants during the time of the slave trade believed that the Mark of Cain was a darkening of his skin.
Oh no.
Yeah, and so they believed, and so that was part of their justification, their retroactive justification. Like, what can we come up with to justify this
right
crime against humanity that we're committing? What can we come up with to say, well, these people deserve the horrible way in which we're treating them? Is they said, well, their skin has been darkened by God, which is reminiscent of this curse that God has against Cain, who was a murderer. From my research, that's sort of what I've come up with. It's different from the curse of Ham.
Right. So for anybody who maybe knew, the Cliff Notes on the Curse of Ham is and quick TW for sexual assault. So after the flood, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and his 3 daughter-in-laws exited the ark to begin civilization anew. Noah planted a vineyard, grew grapes, made wine, and got drunk. And one of his 3 sons, Ham, entered his tent while he was drunk and lying, sleeping, partially unclothed. What exactly happened is not clear, but a lot of scholars interpret this as some kind of sexual assault occurred on Ham's part, committing that against his father. Whatever happened, God cursed Ham with one of the strongest curses that we find in scripture for many generations of his descendants because of the crime that he had committed. Now, the scripture only specifies a curse to a certain number of generations, but people who want to justify racism have kind of retconned this story and believe that the descendants of Ham are people who, after the flood, lived in Africa, and that all descendants of Ham are cursed forever, which is neither of which things are in scripture. But that was another very common justification used for slavery in the United States.
These were 2 of the main justifications that were used for slavery in the United States. This doctrine was also part of the split between the American Baptist Convention and the Southern Baptist Convention. And eventually the Southern Baptist Convention had to apologize and say we were wrong about this, and this was one of the doctrines that they officially changed. But this, I believe, was part of Southern Baptist theology for many, many years, which makes sense as to why doctrines such as these might come up in the independent Baptist movement, because when the independent Baptist split off from the Southern Baptist, that would have been prior to the time when this doctrine would have been changed.
So I had actually never heard of this one growing up in the IFB. I had heard about the Curse of Ham and some very unfortunate racist and not okay teachings based on that. Now I kind of want to dig into it, though. Maybe that'll be our next deconstruction Bible story episode.
Curse of Cain was used to support a ban on ordaining black ministers in most Protestant denominations until the 1960s in the United States and Europe. Wow, that's not great.
Nope.
Curse of Mark of Cain seems like it's just kind of racist and not really based in anything other than prejudice, not really based in the Bible.
Once again, the biblical literalists don't do a very good job of being literal.
If it isn't in the Bible, then it's not true, and the Bible is complete until it's something that you need to infer to I mean, it's sort of like the thing where, you know how people who say that they are purely logical thinkers and don't make decisions based on emotion are just people who can't tell the difference between logic and their own emotions, and who believe all of their own emotional reactions to things are purely logical. And so they're like, I'm clearly a logical thinker, but they just don't. It's like that.
So the next question that we have is a question for you, Gavi. Totally not Fundie related, but I'd love to hear some more of Gavi's observations after moving from Portland to Philly. I also moved from Portland to Northeast Pennsylvania several years ago, though I don't live there now, and found the differences between people's perceptions and the cultural norms super interesting.
Thank you for asking me this question. I could go into great detail about this because I have many observations, but I think that in the interest of time, I only have a few observations that I would like to make. Philly just goes way harder in general. And if you have moved from like the Pacific Northwest or the West Coast to somewhere on the East Coast, I think this is very much an East-West kind of thing. But Philly just absolutely goes way harder than Portland does. In Portland, everyone's chill. Going to concerts in Philadelphia is a physical thing. People are much more rowdy, whereas in Portland, people just don't get that hype. And if you do, people almost look at you like you're kind of like a weirdo who's broadcasting to the public, like broadcasting very publicly to everybody around them that they're actually enjoying whatever it is that they're doing.
I feel that way every time I order a pumpkin spice latte in Portland.
Do you get like people being like, really? You're
I
ordering
I don't know if people are actually looking at me like that, or if that's just the culture here so much that I feel that I'm being judged.
right. It doesn't even matter if somebody's actually judging you for it. You just feel like,
But magically, like two amazing and difficult things happened to me this within the last little 18 months or so. My dad died and I turned 30. And since those two things have happened, I care so much less. Like, I have so much less ability to care if other people are judging me or not.
it is a weird cultural thing though.
Oh, yeah.
In Portland, people don't want to seem like they are too eager to do anything, lest they be perceived as not adequately chill. And because it's very much it's almost as if enjoying life is a privilege, and in the late stage capitalist hellscape that we are unfortunate enough to inhabit, that's not acceptable because you're basically showing off how privileged you are if you're enjoying anything.
Yeah, and like sorry, I keep butting into your answer, but the way that I see it in the late stage capitalist hellscape that we're unfortunate enough to live in, any amount of joy that you can give or bring yourself is a rebellion against the late stage capitalist hellscape.
Thank you for saying that, Sadie. And I wish that more people in Portland would take that into their hearts.
Like, I bought myself a coffee and it made myself happy. Screw you, Jeff Bezos. I found a flower for free on the sidewalk and I thought it was really pretty. I saw a cool nature thing and I gave that to myself and it made me really happy and I didn't have to pay for it. I chose to spend my money on overpriced jeans. That makes me happy, you know?
Sadie, you can't enjoy a nature thing because you have to, when you look at a nature thing, you have to remind yourself that nature is dying. People in Portland, I in my experience from having grown up there, there's a certain level of cynicism, and they'll put layers and layers of sarcasm and non-committal attitude on, but it's all just sort of a show. Like, people are very aware of how they are being perceived. I personally believe that Portlanders are equally as image conscious as people in Los Angeles, but they're just not as honest and upfront about it. Like, the ideal image that you can project as a Portlander is of somebody who doesn't care what people think about you, but it's a very catch-22 kind of thing. Comparison, Philly people really don't care what anybody thinks of them. And it's very much just like, oh, you're going to talk to me, go yourself. Do you have a problem with me? Go yourself. That's how people are out here. And honestly, to me, it's kind of refreshing because people out here aren't afraid to be perceived as assholes. And for me, Portland is more fun to visit as a tourist than it is to live in, because I cannot deal with having to comb through 8 layers of subtext and sarcasm to understand what it is people are actually saying.
Yeah, and I am really non-confrontational as a person, and the people are not afraid to be perceived as assholes doesn't work well for me personally. I'm not comfortable in that kind of environment, but I'm glad that you are, and I'm glad that you're in a place you feel comfortable.
Maybe I should have started with this. Portland is the whitest major city in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
I believe it's either Portland or Seattle is the whitest major city in the United States. I think Portland's like 80% white people. Philly is like 50% black people. They're both very socially progressive cities. But the thing that I've noticed is the difference is that it feels to me like when people are very outspoken about socially progressive causes in Portland, it feels more performative than it does here.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with regards to things like racial justice, because and this is sort of something that I've noticed just having been around people. When I was living in Portland, you would be friends with people, and when they would make friends with somebody, or they would be around somebody who was a racial minority or a religious minority or something, there was this very weird almost similar to the way that I've experienced when evangelical Christians find out that you're Jewish. It's almost just like, oh, here is a person of color that I can act out this theory that I've learned towards in order to be like, this is a way for, if I treat this person in XYZ way that I saw on this infographic on Instagram, then that is my good points thing for the day that I've done.
Right. I can behave perfectly towards this person and make myself feel good.
Yes, and it's never about making the other person very comfortable. Whereas, like, if you move to like Philadelphia and if you live in Philadelphia, chances are you see people like if you live in Portland, you can go literally days without and just like going around your neighborhood or going around the store or just going to work or whatever. You can literally go days without seeing a black person. It's wild. If you live in Philadelphia, you see people who don't look like you every single day, and they're just the people who you interact with as you go about your day. It's just a guy. He's my neighbor. He lives down the street from me. Like, whatever.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really like about our new neighborhood. I think I realized how white Portland is when I moved out here.
Oh, Portland's super white. It's very weird to go back there now. I mean, Portland is much more like PC and respect. I hate using the term PC because that's it's become like a pejorative thing, but that's kind of the nature of the city in a lot of ways. And I don't know if that has something to do with its whiteness. I do feel like it probably does have something to do with Portland's whiteness. Is the part of the reason why maybe that's a bit more prevalent, but I don't know.
I need like Candace Benbow or somebody to write an article for me.
Who?
No, then I'm asking her. Then I'm asking her for emotional labor. Candace Benbow is a very cool Black theologian.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Whose content I enjoy.
Anyway, yeah, I'm going to move on to the next question. Sadie, here's a question for you. What were Fundie vacations like? Where did you guys tend to go? Were there places that were absolutely banned?
Oh boy. Okay, so taking vacations at all is not banned within the IFB, but it's kind of mildly looked down upon, is how I would frame it. The idea of family time is very, very idolized, but the idea of rest or relaxation is not. And as we talked about in the Paul Sand episode and the Wizard of God episode, missing church for vacation is 100% not allowed. So your vacation needed to be planned around Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, making sure you could be in IFB church and not miss a service. It was most encouraged to leave for vacation on a Monday morning and then come back on Saturday night. So you would only miss a Wednesday night at your church and you could go to a different IFB church on the Wednesday night. People would also sometimes pack their car, have the car completely packed and ready to go, come to Sunday morning church, and then get in the car immediately after church and drive towards the vacation destination, and then stop on Sunday night to go to a different IFB church, and then wake up on Monday morning and drive the rest of the way to wherever they were going on vacation. And it was pretty common to ask your pastor before you're going to go on vacation, like, hey, I want to go on vacation. I want to go to Denver in this particular week. Number one, I want to make sure that doesn't conflict with any big days or fall program coming up. Number two, do you know of any good IFB churches in Denver? And then your pastor could approve your vacation week or ask you to move it forward or back a week if they had something big planned. And then your pastor will go on. Now it's on online registries. At the time, like when I was growing up, it was like phone tree stuff. And they would call around, like in my branch of the IFB, your pastor would call the Hyles Anderson alumni office and say, who do you have pastoring in Denver? And then the Hyles Anderson alumni office would give your pastor a list of all Hyles Anderson alumni pastoring near Denver. And then the pastor would call those churches and vet them and decide who to send the church members to.
It's like asking your boss to approve your PTO request.
I mean, it kind of is. And you were expected to let the pastor know if you were going to miss a week of church. But once your vacation is pastor approved as far as where would you go. Obviously, you can't go to the beach during summer because there are too many immodest people there. You can go to the beach off season, and this is also better for Fundie families. If you're gonna be wearing like full clothing to the beach, you might as well go when it's cooler, because if you go when it's hot, you're gonna be way too hot. It's also encouraged to go during off season because it's a cheaper trip, and thriftiness is a virtue in the IFB. People definitely went to Disney, but again, it was encouraged to go during a slower season and make sure you still go to church twice on Sunday and on Wednesday night. People would also go to amusement parks like Six Flags, but you weren't allowed to go to the water park side. Historical vacations and trips to see family, I think, were the most common, as well as like nature vacations, like going to see the Grand Canyon. My family did a huge historical road trip my senior year of high school. We did Pigeon Forge. We did some historical sites in West Virginia, Mount Vernon, Monticello, Washington, D.C., Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. We did a tour of the White House, and then we visited Mayberry on the way back.
That sounds like a great vacation.
It was an amazing vacation. With my 2023 understanding of the world, I'm maybe less than thrilled with fitting a notorious blood diamond and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington all into one vacation. But I'm thankful for the less problematic parts of that trip. It was a great trip. And that's the sort of historical things that people would do. I had absolutely no peers who traveled out of the country for a vacation.
No, but that's expensive.
The only people who got to go out of the country were missionary kids.
So next question for you. This is kind of broad. Somebody said, I know this is broad, but can you explain the Fundie concept of grace? And is it different than how the Catholics view grace? I grew up going to a Lithuanian Catholic church where nothing was explained to us, plus everything was in Lithuanian. So grace is one of these concepts I'm fuzzy on. Wow. Okay. So the service being in a different language probably would significantly complicate your ability to understand the concepts.
Yeah.
You can relate.
So remember when earlier it was either this episode or last week's episode, I was talking about asking Jonathan to just explain evolution to me? Explain grace is kind of like that, but I'm going to see what I can do on like a 5-minute timer. The fundamental concept of Christianity is that humans are sinful, and that's a problem because God is not sinful. God is perfect. There's a separation between people and God because all people are sinful and God is not. Grace is the thing that goes between people and God, the bridge over that gulf, the thing that closes the gap, that allows imperfect humans to commune with a perfect God. The concept of grace, I think, is pretty universal in Christianity. Grace is God's goodness, God's willingness to forgive our sins by the mechanism of Jesus dying on the cross. And then that's it. Like that's where we all quit agreeing, is right there. Because the whole penal substitutionary atonement versus ransom atonement thing, all of that is about what specifically about Jesus's death on the cross made it so that God can now extend grace to us. Is it the death part? Is it the blood part? Is it the rising again part? Is it something that Jesus did in the spirit while he was dead? You know, broke the gates of hell open, defeated the devil, all that stuff. Went forward in time, went back in time. There are a bunch of theories. I realize that I'm kind of sounding nuts, but
the more you go into the what did Jesus do during that, like the more it sounds totally ludicrous to me.
Yeah, so some people believe it is the blood, specifically the bleeding part, that is the key in the door that unlocks the torrent of God's grace that God wants to pour down upon us. Some people believe that it is the dying part that is the key in the door of grace that unlocks the grace that God wants to pour down upon us. Other people believe it's the rising again. Other people believe it's something that Jesus went to hell and temporarily defeated the devil during that time. And there are people who believe he went back in time and did some stuff, or went forward in time and did some stuff. I don't have time to get into it right now. So that's the first problem. The second problem is we all agree that there's a gulf between sinful humans and God, and that God wants to bridge that gulf, but a thing needs to happen to bridge it. So whatever you believe that Jesus did that makes it possible to bridge that gap, most Christians still believe, most non-universalist Christians believe, that there is something that humans need to do to cross the bridge. Okay, so Jesus made the bridge. Now humans have to cross the bridge. Calvinists would believe that God reaches across the bridge and picks you up like a little chess player and walks you across the bridge. That's unconditional election. The IFB believe that what you need to do to cross the bridge is obtain a basic understanding of the concepts I've been describing here and desire to cross the bridge, and then ask God to usher you across the bridge. The Catholic view is more that God is responsible for getting you across the bridge, but you obtain grace through the sacraments. It is not, people will misinterpret Catholicism to think, you've got to get a certain amount of grace. You've got to get, you need 100 grace, and you've got to fill your little grace meter, like the donation meter at a fundraiser. And that's not really, the Catholic concept is God is fully responsible for getting you across the bridge once you decided you want to go across the bridge. However, you get the grace that gets you across the bridge through the sacraments. I think that works. I think that's a good explanation. That was slightly under 5 minutes. And this is kind of where like 90% of denominational differences come from. It's when it comes to theological denominational differences. What specifically did Jesus do to make the bridge, and what does a person do to cross the bridge? Is it God who does it for you? God brings you across the bridge, or the IFB view, which is the opt-in salvation? The person, the human person, must decide to walk across the bridge under their own of their own free will and under their own power.
That makes sense, though, and that makes sense why there would be differences in denomination behind that, because that isn't really specified. Although that's weird, because if you believe that everything is in the Bible and that everything that you need is in the Bible, then why would you believe that Jesus would go to hell and fight the devil if it doesn't say that Jesus went to hell and fought the devil in the Bible? I don't know.
Well, it's kind of in there. It's implied. And then to make it even more complicated, there are scriptures that seem to support all of the different views of grace, which I've presented so far.
Okay, well, that clarifies nothing, and also
depending on what translation you're using and how literally you're taking them and how you're interpreting specific words in scripture.
So I would, do you want to move on to the next question?
Yeah.
We only have
otherwise we'll be here all day.
Yeah,
we only have a few left. We only have about 10-15 minutes left. We got to wrap up.
So next question is, what's up with Christian colleges charging money for every rule infraction?
They need money, and people quit caring about demerits.
That makes sense. Next question is, will you or have you planned a Bates family deep dive? I've been hoping for that one. So we've had the Bates family on our list because they're like the dollar store Duggars, right? That's kind of who they are.
Yeah. They're more openly racist.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll have to talk about them. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, there was a whole thing.
Okay, well, we'll do the Bates at some point, because we've had them on our list for a while, and it seems like, Jill came out with her book. I don't know what else is going on with the Duggars, if any of the other ones are going to come out with their book. I do feel like that now Josh is in jail, Ginger did her book, Jill did her book, Jim Bob lost his election that he ran for. I do feel like we're probably going to be entering maybe like a Duggar's quiet period where just because the amount of PR that's been coming out around this family has been so catastrophic, and none of them really come out of this looking at all rosy, except for like the daughters, I think. Like Jill and Ginger, and I guess Jessa, which, by the way, congratulations to her on her new pregnancy announcement. And also it's very interesting that it just came out that she's not IBLP either. I do feel like now that it's very clear that, like, I don't want to say none of his kids are, but like a bunch of his kids are like actively getting away from being IBLP, that Jim Bob might, and the IBLP is kind of like, I don't want to say they're on their last legs, but they're nowhere near as popular or as potent as they were 20 years ago. I do get the feeling like Jim Bob may be kind of like sinking out of cultural relevancy, but also Jim Bob is the kind of person who decided to run for state government while his son was on trial for possession of child sex abuse materials, and while he was basically bankrolling his son's defense and playing PR for his son during this trial. And Jim Bob thought that that was a good idea. So I don't know, maybe he'll just decide that he's going to flip a coin 3 times again and run for president.
Oh, that would be great.
I don't like,
I would love that.
everything to do with logic. Like, Jim Bob defies all logic of what is and isn't a good idea. So I don't know. Jim Bob might come out with a book and release all of the information and just be like, these are all of the times that all of my daughters disobeyed me and betrayed me, and like in response to counting the cost. I don't know.
No, I would love to do the Bates family. It's a whole new thing that I have to start. And my toxic trait is that I have a incredibly hard time telling the Bates and the Plaths apart to begin with.
Right, because when we did our episodes on Plathville like a year ago,
I was like, oh wait, this is not the Bates.
no, because the Plaths were, we watched their show and we're like, this is kind of a good show because it's a show about deconstruction and family dynamics, whereas the Duggar show is like, we went to mini golf today, we saw Dolly Parton.
I really want you to stop bringing up the mini golf. It's really gross.
That's like, whenever I think of the Duggars, that's like the one scene that pops into my head with the Ben Seawald and Jessa, and they're talking about kissing at the mini golf course, and I'm just like,
Yes.
it's so uncomfortable.
No, I know we need to do the Bates. I also want to talk about the Maxwell family at some point. They are not reality TV Duggars, reality TV Fundies, but they are chronically online Fundies. But when we do one of these large families, I want to make sure I have all the details and get it right. And I also want to make sure I'm able to tie it into the bigger things that we're all learning about fundamentalism. So it's kind of involved research, so we have to plan that carefully.
Question: was Ruby Frank a fundamentalist? Is
Mormon,
she like
I think.
Mormon? Okay, because she's somebody who I could see us talking about, because reality TV, I mean, there are these reality TV families who have had great success on reality television, but now that the way that television and media consumption is going on is totally different now than it was, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think that a lot of these social media family influencers, especially the religious ones, are ones that maybe we should shift focus into talking about, because I'm sure that they have things that we need to look at and things that we need to discuss. So I think that could be another one that we could look into. But yeah, the Bates have been on our list for some time. We just haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah, so when I was first, and I know I've told this on the show before, but when we were first talking about doing a podcast, one of my biggest concerns was running out of topics. So we made a list of 100 topics to reassure me that there would actually be enough to talk about. And there are a few of those original 100 topics that still have not been touched on our show. One of them we're doing for Halloween content.
I'm so excited for it. It's going to be really good.
I'm really excited.
By the way, fun piece of podcasting advice. If you ever decide that you want to start your own podcast or your own content of any sort, and you're trying to figure out what you would talk about, then one of the best things that you can do is sit down and make a list. And if you can make a list of 50, or if you make a list of 50 topics that you could talk about, then that's a year of content. If you come out with one episode a week, that's a year of content. If you come out with 50 topics,
Right.
Or if you can do 100, that's 2 years. And I think we did closer to 100 topics, and we just kept adding to it. So our list, I think, probably has close to 200 topics about it. At this
Yeah, if not more, because there's like more and more things will get added because something will happen in the news, and then we'll do an episode on that, and then that episode will remind us, oh yeah, there's this other side content that needs to be talked about, and it keeps on growing.
And the other side of that is that a lot of times we'll write down a topic and then we'll realize, oh, we cannot talk about that in just one episode. That's going to need to be 2 or 3 parts. And so that even extends it even longer. So that's, I think, something that's very important. Sadie, next question for you. I'd really love to hear more on Sadie's experiences growing up in poverty, but getting support from the church to get the family by. That's a fascinatingly socialist concept. That's a really interesting insight, and that's a thought that I've had as well. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this?
So the way that the Fundies see it, socialism is when the government does what the church is supposed to do. The church is supposed to feed and clothe people and help them get by financially. But when the government does that, they perceive it as the government having control over people's lives. So the fear is, well, if the government gives you food stamps, then they can control what you're able to buy with your food stamps. And then they can make you only buy organic fruits and vegetables if they want to. And then they can put poor farmers out of business by only allowing organic fruits and vegetables to be grown. And then they're pushing our environmentalist agenda. And then, since we're all dependent on the government for organic fruits and vegetables and farm subsidies, they can make us all use solar power instead and not use coal or gas anymore. And then they can make us all drive electric vehicles. And if we all drive electric vehicles, the government can put computer chips in them so they know where we are all the time. So then when the last days come and Christians need to go underground, we won't be able to get food because the government will have messed up the farming systems and will be responsible for giving us all cards to buy food on. And that's probably the mark of the beast anyway. And when Christians need to go underground, we'll be dependent on the government for food and we won't be able to go underground as easily. And we'll all have these electric vehicles that have chips in them and the government will know where we are at all times. So the government will be able to find the Christians and persecute them.
So what you just said there, I mean, it's crazy.
I got in the headspace, man.
No, it's crazy, but it is very interesting to me because since we did our Alberto Rivera episode and since we talked about J. Frank Norris and his shift from being like a Klansman to being to believing that the Catholic Church was okay because it's the last chance to save the world from communism, the more I've come to understand that the connecting tissue between the fundamentalist satanic panic and the protocols of the elders of Zion conspiracy theories that are connected to the Book of Revelation and connected to Nazism and the Ku Klux Klan, the connecting tissue between those things is more and more, it becomes clear to me that it becomes the Red Scare and it becomes McCarthyism and it becomes the anti-communist.
You're saying it's the Book of Revelation and beliefs about the rapture that are holding all of that together?
I'm saying that it's all holding itself, like each other together.
And I know like that, so that's like the Fundie explanation of why the church has to support and feed and clothe people. And also their explanation of why socialism is bad.
Well, it's interesting to me because when I look at these church leaders of these mega churches, and these, and these are the churches that they hold up as like, these are the ones who have been blessed by God and they're doing it right because that's why their ministry is so big. And you look at these mega church pastors and they have private jets and they have fancy cars and they have the fancy shoes and they have solid gold Rolexes and they have the iced out Patek Philippe jewelry and the Balenciaga and the Gucci belt and the Fendi belt and whatever. And you see them living these lives of luxury when the church is supposed to be feeding and clothing people. And these are the things that are being blessed. I see a lot of similarity to when there were a lot of these authoritarian regimes that said, oh well, we're a regime of the people, but really they were a regime that that the people in charge would get to live lavishly, and the people who were below were not necessarily the best cared for and did not have their needs provided for. And I see that similarity in there as well.
There are also verses in scripture about specifically caring for the pastor, and there are a couple little like side cultural things about the pastor shouldn't make too much money, but the pastor also needs to look like a successful person to attract more successful people to the church. And I don't think we quite have time to get into that today. But I hope that the part about socialism was answered.
I do think that topic's very interesting, though. It's interesting to look at.
One more question for you, Gavi. This listener wrote in, I'm wondering if Gavi has ever experienced any discrimination due to his name. Anti-Semitism is big and loud, so it strikes me as especially having a target on his back.
So this is an interesting question. I want to thank you for answering it, for asking it, excuse me. Answer to this is that I have not experienced this in real life because Gavriel is my Hebrew name. It is not my government name. The name that is on my driver's license, that is on my job applications, whenever I apply for a job, all of that stuff is a different name than the name that I use publicly. And people who I'm friends with use either or both of these names interchangeably or a combination of the two sometimes. And I don't personally have a preference for either one if somebody's referring to me or speaking to me. The reason why I've done that is partially for like a security thing, because, you know, not going publicly by your legal name makes it harder for people to find out where you live, or to find your private social media, to find out who your family is, to find out who you're related to. And if you're Jewish on the internet, then that's a kind of a big deal, because I think back in like 2020 or 2021, my Twitter handle got added to a list that was going around Telegram of people who were outspoken about anti-Semitism on the internet. And then that list was basically going around Telegram of like, these are accounts of Jewish people on the internet who are speaking about these issues. And then that kind of invited a lot of targeted harassment of me on just like people would send horrible things to the private messages of my Twitter DM, stuff like that. That's sort of like part of it as well. So yeah. But no, not in real life. I haven't experienced this in person. The extent to the anti-Semitism that I've experienced has mostly been institutional, in that either bosses or school or you know, professors or whatever would not give me Jewish holidays off, or people would make odd comments here and there. Oftentimes the comments wouldn't be in I want to say like in they wouldn't have cruel intent to them, but they would be either patronizing or they would be in some other ways problematic. And I realized that by saying this, my existence as a Jewish person has been kind of charmed, because I've never, I don't think, had to fear for my physical safety as a result of being Jewish, as I know a lot of people have, but it's just kind of different.
Yeah, and it's also just from an outside perspective, it is kind of wild that you're describing this as a charmed existence. Like, it's actually been relatively easy for me compared to other people. And what you're describing is the horrible shit I have seen on your Twitter.
Well, also,
and like, that's the easier side.
It is the easier side.
I believe you and I hear you, but I think that speaks to the extent of anti-Semitism in the world. Well,
part of it is also that I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and Portland, Oregon is a city that's probably about 5% Jewish. That's not a very large number when you're talking about major cities in the United States. Philadelphia, on the other hand, is like 12% Jewish. The thing that happens, and the thing that you kind of realize when you actually look into these numbers, is that anti-Semitism only really like the people who are doing it in a major way do it in places where there are a lot of Jews and they're more visible. And so Portland doesn't become the same kind of hotbed for it that a place like Brooklyn would become, in that in Brooklyn, it was for a while, and it still is. If you're Orthodox Jewish, you're much more likely to get violently attacked on the street, just like walking around, because you're visibly identifiable. Whereas in Portland, that's not the same level of issue. And so just depending on who you are and where you are, like my physical safety has never been an issue for me. But but online stuff like that, I do take very serious precautions when it comes to trying to avoid that and trying to, not open myself up to that. But nothing that I feel like is unreasonable, and nothing that I feel like is something that isn't just good practice anyways, if you're a person who is creating content for a living, or if you're a person who is, and I don't want to refer to myself as a public figure because I'm not like famous or anything, but like who is a public figure in that way. It's good practice to just practice privacy and security and stuff like that, and not open yourself up to weirdos, and doubly so if you're Jewish.
When I get to our last question, I can answer that one pretty quick.
Yeah, we can answer this one really quickly. We have one final question, which is, why do the IFB make it the woman's job to make sure that they are not arousing any man? It's because they hate women.
Yeah. So that that's pretty much it. The reasoning that they give, though, is Eve. So in the Garden of Eden, the way that the Fundies tell the story, God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden. God told Adam and Eve, don't look at that tree. Actually, don't touch it. Don't even look at it, or you're going to die. And the devil came along as a snake, and he said to Eve, yea, hath God said, put doubt into her mind. And the way the Fundies tell the story, Eve ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam, her partner, saw that she had eaten it and thought, if she's going to die, then I'm going to die too. And that Eve coerced or talked him into also eating the fruit. So the fundamentalist concept is that women are the originators of sin on the earth, and women will always be able to talk men into sin or tempt or coerce men into sin. The way that that's filtered down into purity culture and modesty culture is that women are responsible not only for the actions of men, but for the thoughts of men. And then there's all the extra biblical misogynist teaching about men just being animals who cannot control themselves and powerless at the beauty of a woman, and women being responsible for restraining that beauty and restraining men's attraction to them.
That was very well put. And I think that's kind of the end of our Q&A episode. That's the end of our Q&A episode. Thank you guys for listening to it, and thank you for giving us the wonderful answers that you've given us, Sadie.
Yeah, and thank you to our listeners for sending in such great questions. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be super great for this episode to come out. My brain's fried. Sorry.
You know what? It's okay. Let's sign off and be done.
If you like our show, you can listen to a very extended version of today's episode that's available on our Patreon, which is patreon.com/Leaving Eden Podcast. You can join our Facebook group and our subreddit. Both of those are called Eden Exodus, and you can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram and Threads at Leaving Eden Podcast. Make sure that you recommend the show to your family, your friends, your coworkers, your enemies. It's so awesome when you guys do that. It really helps us. Sadie, do you want to plug your social medias?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Sadie Carpenter Music, on Twitter at Hell Yeah Sadie, and on TikTok at Sadie Carpenter 1.
And my socials media are Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at GAVRIELHACOHEN. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.
But old rolling river of time healed me in too many days. No regrets, no confusion. There'll be no pollution. I'm so thankful I've decided to change. decided